Today we're going to continue our discussion in U.S. history, concentrating on the Civil War period. And to begin this broad period of time in U.S. history, we're going to begin by pointing out some of the causes that led to the Civil War. Now, although most of the time many people point to just a couple of factors to the Civil War, in reality the Civil War and its causes is a very complex thing. But even though it's a complex thing, we are going to highlight three main reasons or three main causes that led to the Civil War. And these three main causes were slavery, sectionalism, and states' rights. Now, when most of us think of the causes to the Civil War, what is the first thing that comes to everyone's mind as far as what caused the Civil War? Yes, that's right, it is slavery. And although slavery is one of the main reasons, again, this was not the only reason why or that led to the Civil War. There was also other issues in this time period in American history that led to this big event. Let's begin talking about some of these other issues, beginning with sectionalism. Now, what is sectionalism? The dictionary defines sectionalism as a tendency to be more concerned with the interests of your particular group or region than with the problems and interests of the larger group or country. So sectionalism is divisions that occur between two different regions or sections because they have two different opposing views. Now, when the United States became independent and became its own nation, there was no lines divided or nothing drawn to divide the United States between North and South. If there was any sectionalism during that time period, it was actually between East and West because there occurred different interests. Now, what led to American sectionalism in this antebellum period between the North and the South? Well, let's look at a couple of examples. So, what were some of the issues that led to this sectionalism? Well, first of all, it all began with the tariffs. Now, tariffs were different taxes that were imposed to imported goods. So if anything was going to come from a different country, like Great Britain, for example, into the United States, to be sold in the United States or to be consumed in the United States, there would be an additional tax imposed on them. Now, who benefited from these different tariffs? Well, the North did. They liked it because it protected the Northern interests against foreign competition. The North wanted for the goods that they were producing to be consumed domestically. Well, the South wasn't so interested in them because they disliked it, because they directly traded with foreign countries and did not want to pay higher prices for the imported luxury goods. Once again, the South was more interested in maintaining their agricultural economy. And this actually leads us to one of the other points that further divided the North and the South. The different economies developed in a very contrasted way. For example, the North was becoming more and more industrialized, as we said. There was more industry, there was more railroads, more development in the North. As the South was growing also, it was basically centered around a cotton boom that was occurring. During that time, most of the cotton in the world was being produced in the South. This actually also affected government, and there was a beginning of different political divisions between the North and the South. Although they both the different amounts of states that were both free states and slave states was equal at this time. Congress, actually, most of the power was held in the North because it was most densely populated. But the South, because they were more limited in their power in Congress, they had more unified political ideas, so they became more unified. So this is one of the reasons why the United States became more and more sectionalized. Now, a second cause to the Civil War, we said, was the states' rights. And states' rights has always been a very important issue in the history of the United States, going back even to the beginning of our nation. Again, states' rights are the rights and powers held by individual U.S. states rather than by the federal government. So states' rights is something that always has been close to the hearts of Americans. How did this play part in the cause of the Civil War? Well, a couple of different issues. Mainly, during this time period, as we had before explained, the issue of slavery and who would decide if a state would be a slave state or a free state was something that was highly debated. It didn't become an issue until the late 18th century, early 19th century, as the United States was gaining more and more territories, and as the agricultural revolution or the cotton boom was expanding in the South. So that further led to the South's interest, because their economy centered on the expansion of cotton. They were highly interested in gaining other territories where they could promote them to be a slave state, so they can expand their different agricultural interests. Now, this became a center of attention because the South didn't believe that anyone should be telling them whether they could be a free state or a no state. They were highly interested in maintaining the interest of their own state. Now, one of the different solutions that was submitted or that was put into practice during the different decisions that were made as far as admitting a state to be in a free state or a slave state was popular sovereignty. We'll be going into details later on in the next couple of days into what this meant and how this affected the different types of territories. But specifically, we just want to cover how it affected the state of Kansas. Because the state was going to decide, or the people of the state were going to decide if it was free or slave state, It led to an incredible amount of violence in the state. This map actually points out the different occurrences of violence that occurred in a very short amount of period. Now, the whole notion of a state deciding for themselves whether they're to be a free state or a slave state was centered on the 10th Amendment, where it states, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." So this is something that Southerners held to on deciding whether a state should be free or not, or whether they should be allowed to take their slaves into a newly populated territory. Now, to finish up with the main, or one of the main causes of the Civil War is slavery. We're going to keep in mind this quote from Abraham Lincoln, where he said, "I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the houses to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided." So Abraham Lincoln was centered or recognized the issues of maintaining unity while dealing with this issue of slavery. Now, why did slavery become the forefront of so many discussions in this time period? Well, there are some main causes that led to it. And we're going to begin by identifying some of the movements in the abolitionists. For example, during this time period, we have what's called the Second Great Awakening in American history. So there's this religious movement where the center of it is a lot of reformation of people. And most of the reformation is centered on slavery and the fact that slavery could not coexist with Christian beliefs. So the Second Great Awakening even produced a lot more abolitionists that had already existed, and abolitionists had existed already even during colonial times, but it became so much more prominent during the Second Great Awakening. Additionally, the book Uncle Tom's Cabin, that was produced during this time period, also brought to the front, or brought more attention to the issues of slavery and made it more personal. Especially when this book became dramatized in the theater. Now people were watching as the events from the book Uncle Tom's Cabin were being lived out, and the audience could see how personally people were being affected by slavery, how families were being divided. Also, another issue one of the main issues that brought slavery to the forefront, especially politically, was the election of Abraham Lincoln. The South viewed that no matter what they were going to do, once Abraham Lincoln was elected as president, even though he promised he would not end slavery, the South viewed it as something that was inevitable with Abraham Lincoln as president. And that's why they succeeded. So again, these are the causes of slavery that we're going to be covering. And although the causes of the American Civil War are complex, we said that three of the main causes were slavery, sectionalism, and states' rights.